The girl wakes up in the middle of the cremation, with smoke and fire reaching the coffin. The workers hear the noise and call the police immediately. But what happens next makes the whole poor town cry. Everything was burning, but inside it wasn't really fire. It wasn't another kind of heat yet. It was a heat that came from the chest, slowly rising up the neck and face. A heat that brought fear, confusion, pain. It was dark, very dark. No light, no color. It was like being trapped in a color. It was like being trapped in a room with no windows. But worse, because there, even the silence was not silence. A noise of metal scraping. Something sounded in the distance, slow, as if someone were pushing iron against iron. Her body did not respond. It was as if it were stuck to something hard, heavy, cold on the inside and hot on the outside. A heat that was trapped and tight. She tried to move her leg. Nothing. She tried to turn her head. Nothing. She tried to open her eyes, but she couldn't. But inside, everything screamed. She wanted to scream. She wanted to call for help. She wanted to call her mom or her sister or someone, but no voice came out. Not a sound. Her mouth wouldn't open. Her throat was stuck. The heat rose little by little, like when someone closes the door to the room and turns off the light. But the sun outside still warms the wall. She didn't know where she was. She only knew she was trapped, and that heat, that damn heat, wasn't just outside. It was also coming from inside. Her chest was tight. Her stomach hurt. Her eyes burned even though they were closed. And along with all that came a fear, a nameless fear, an inexplicable fear. One of those fears that only small children feel when they wake up alone in the dark and hear a noise in the hallway. That was it. That was what she felt. Only this time, it wasn't a noise in the hallway. And she just wanted to get out of there, but she couldn't. The smell came slowly at first. Just annoying. A strange, strong smell that stuck inside her nose. Smoke, not from a cigarette, not from food. It was something else. A dry, thick smoke that seemed to burn without fire. She felt it even though she didn't open her eyes, even though she couldn't move. Her body remained motionless, her chest beating hard, her ribs feeling very tight, as if they had shrunk. And then the memory came suddenly, in the middle of that darkness. She heard it again. "Shut up, girl." The voice was thick and harsh, full of anger. She cringed inside. The sound was like someone screaming in her ear, and along with the sound came the slap, right there, unable to move. She felt that heavy hand hitting her on the left side of her face again. It hurt. It always hurt. She didn't know if she was awake or dreaming, but she knew that this had happened many times before, and every time the hand came, she learned not to speak, not to cry, not to ask for anything. Now, in that hot, dark place that smelled of smoke, her body did not respond, but her mind screamed. It screamed without making a sound. She just wanted to get out of there, but she didn't even know where she was. She only knew that somehow it was worse than before, worse than that house where she lived in silence. Another memory came like a flash. Suddenly there was no smoke, no heat, no darkness, just the image of the house. It was a mud house with a dirt floor and cracked walls. The low ceiling, made of old zinc sheets, rattled when the wind blew hard. It always smelled of dampness, of forgotten things. She saw everything as if she were still there. In a corner of the living room, her mother was curled up in a ball, hugging her knees, her face hidden in her hands, crying softly. She said nothing. She just rocked back and forth as if she wanted to disappear to the other side. Her father stood with a serious face and a hard gaze. He spat on the floor, making a dry sound, and then said, "She's sick. She's useless." His voice was loud and cold, as if he were talking about an animal. She heard him. She understood, even though she didn't really know what he meant. She understood because the way he said it was the way someone who doesn't care would say it. The girl was in the middle of the room, trembling. Her bare feet touched the cold mud. Her legs were thin and weak, her body so skinny that when she tried to take a step, she fell. The floor came quickly. The fall was dry, a small blow without a scream, without drama. Her face touched the hard ground, and there, on that dirty floor, she remained. Her head hurt. Her body did not react. Her eyes open, seeing only dust, a coffee dust, still, with an old smell. She wanted to call her mother, but her mother was only crying. She wanted her father to carry her, but he turned away. Then came silence, and then darkness, a darkness that had no end. And now it was the heat returning, and she wondered, unable to form words. After the darkness comes the fire. But no one answered, only her body still, only the heat growing, and that last image stuck to her chest. Her mother crying and her father spitting, and she falling as if they had left her there, to disappear. That was the day before, back in Santa Cruz del Monte, a tiny village lost in the middle of nowhere, dirt roads, simple houses, people who spoke softly and had tired eyes, a place where life moves slowly. The girl had been silent for days, not eating, not talking, sleeping a lot, her body limp, her eyes sunken, and that fever that wouldn't go away. Her mother made her teas, put wet cloths on her forehead, and prayed softly by her bedside. Her father, tougher, said it was just a girl's weakness that would soon pass, but it didn't pass when she stopped moving and fell to the floor. Her mother screamed, "She's dead! Oh my God! No, no, my girl!" Her father, after getting angry, went to the health center on the other side of the square. It was a small building with a crooked sign and peeling walls. Inside, a lone doctor in a dirty coat and red eyes from working so many shifts saw the girl from afar, lying on a stretcher. He touched her neck, checked her pulse quickly, looked at her parents, and without looking them in the eye said, "Sudden death." Her mother didn't understand. "What do you mean? Why? Was it her heart? Does that happen to children? There's nothing we can do?" He didn't order any tests or ask any questions. He took a piece of paper and filled it out by hand in hurried writing, then stamped it with a heavy seal. Natural causes. The father looked at the paper and understood almost nothing of what it said. "You have to sign here," said the doctor without looking up. The father took the pen with a trembling hand. The mother couldn't stop crying. "But they're not going to take her away to do tests." "Why? She's already dead, ma'am. That will only delay everything. Better to let her go in peace." They signed without knowing, without understanding, without asking. They signed because they trusted, because they were afraid, because no one there knew what was right, much less them. The body was placed in a simple bag, without a mass, without flowers, without a wake, and no one asked any more questions in that little town, where ignorance is older than time, and death is still treated with silence. They put the coffin in the old town hall car, a converted pickup truck with a gray tarp over it, without flowers. No people around, no farewell, only silence and a piece of paper with a stamp stuck on the outside, saying what she was. Deceased child, natural causes. The coffin was light, made of thin wood, with no varnish, no handles, no name. It was the cheapest one, because there was no money for anything better, because there was no one to say she deserved more. The driver took the dirt road, then the highway for about 30 minutes to the neighboring town where the public crematorium was located. A gray building on top of a hill with a strong smell of ash and silence inside. At the entrance, there was a row of coffins, some for adults, others for children, some accompanied by crying families, others like hers, alone with no one nearby. A worker checked the papers, saw the handwritten note in the corner of the form. Girl with no papers, no money, no one. He signed the entry sheet, put a stamp on it, and called his colleague. It was quick and direct. She had no grave, no funeral. It was cheaper to cremate through the city council. The girl became a number, became a formality. She joined the line for the end, while the others waited with candles, hugs, and tears. She waited for the heat of the machine, waited for the fire, but no one there knew that her heart was still beating, slowly, hidden. The line moved forward, and time passed, and every second was 1 second closer to extinguishing a life that was not yet over. Luis arrived early that day. His shift started at 7, but he always arrived a little earlier. He liked the silence of the morning when the corridors were still empty, and the smell of coffee was stronger than that of ash. He entered the large room where the ovens were. The air was hot and suffocating. Smoke slowly rose from the pipes above, a constant mist that clung to clothes hair, and skin. He was already used to it. The coffins for the day lined up in a row. Luis looked at the papers and read quickly. They didn't even have names. Some came with the label NN. No name, nothing. That was what hurt the most, but he didn't show it anymore. There was another one, a small, light coffin, one of the smallest he had ever seen. A girl with no papers, no money, no one. He read it aloud and swallowed hard. His colleague Ramon arrived a moment later. "How many today?" Luis replied softly, "5. This is the third one." Ramon leaned against the wall, pulled his cap down over his eyes, and yawned. He was already very used to it. Luis stood there watching the oven begin to light up. A soft orange light shone through the metal slits. He took a deep breath. The silence in the room was heavy. All you could hear was the machine in the background, that constant humming. Luis took control of a small panel with a few buttons. He pressed one, and the green light came on. Then he looked at the girl's coffin again, so small, so light, and said almost without a voice, "One more." His hand was shaking, though he didn't notice. His fingers went to the big red button and pressed it slowly. Click. The heating began. The oven crackled. The smoke increased. It was just another day at work. Just another number. Just another girl that no one claimed. But there, inside, there was still life. Luis walked back to see the next one in line when he heard a quick, sharp noise. He stopped mid-step and looked around. The sound had been soft, but clear. It wasn't from the machine. He knew every noise that oven made. It wasn't the clanging of metal or the normal crackling of the structure heating up. It was something else, something different, a more human sound. Knock, knock, knock. He stood completely still. His heart leapt in his chest. His forehead grew cold. That had come from the oven, right where they had placed the coffin. The panel was still preheating. The temperature was rising slowly. Luis looked back at the oven and, without turning his head, called out to his colleague, who was looking at a spreadsheet further back. "Did you hear that?" Ramon looked up without much interest. He thought it was a joke, or one of the normal noises from the oven. "Now the dead are knocking," he said, laughing mockingly, like someone who has seen it all and is no longer surprised. Luis didn't respond. He remained still, his heart beating fast. He was sure of what he had heard. The sound returned. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder, clearer. 3 quick, desperate knocks, as if someone were banging with a clenched fist from inside the coffin, or worse, from inside the oven. Luis ran toward the oven with quick, clumsy steps, almost tripping. His face changed, his skin turned white, and he shouted, "Turn it off! Turn it off!" Ramon took a second to understand. Then he also ran, frightened by the tone of his friend's voice. Luis was already turning off the panel with trembling fingers, pressing the wrong buttons. The oven began to slow down, the sound of the internal flame gradually diminishing. Thick smoke rose, and for a moment it seemed that everything was still except for their hearts. The oven was still hot, very hot. Luis and Ramon pulled the cart out carefully but quickly. The metal was almost burning when they opened the door and saw the coffin. The wood was already dark around the edges, warped by the heat. It was a matter of minutes, maybe seconds. Luis bent down, put his hand on the lid, and heard a soft sound from inside. A breath, a moan. "She's alive." The oven crackled from the heat, but they didn't wait. Luis grabbed the bar on the cart and pulled hard. It was heavy and deformed, warped. The coffin had already changed color. The edges were dark and burned. Some parts of the lid were beginning to sink like wet paper in a fire. Ramon helped, and the two of them pulled the cart out into the next room, where the air was less hot. Luis knelt down and placed his sweaty hands on the scorched lid. "Help me. Quick," he whispered. The two of them began to remove the nails with a makeshift tool. The wood broke easily. It was fragile, cheap, made to disappear, not to protect. When the lid gave way and opened, time seemed to stand still. There was no wind, no noise, no world. There was only a girl lying there, weak, her eyes half open, her eyelashes stuck together, her face wet with sweat. She was alive, breathing slowly, barely, but breathing. Luis couldn't believe it. He brought his hand to her face slowly, as if touching something sacred. Her skin was warm, but not from the oven. It was the warmth of life that was still there, hidden, resisting. She blinked and looked at him weakly, but she looked at him, and that was enough. Luis remained still, kneeling beside her with his hands covering his mouth. Ramon took a step back. No one said anything. The silence was so loud that the only sound that could be heard was the girl's painful but real. Every breath she took was like a silent cry for help, and then she cried. At first it was just a soft sound, as if she no longer knew how to do it. Then came the real crying, weak, hoarse, almost voiceless, but full of everything she had not been able to say. It was a cry that cut through the air, that made your chest hurt. The cry of someone who had returned from the brink of the end and still did not know if she wanted to be here. Luis cried with her. He didn't care about anything anymore. He sat down on the floor next to her and slowly ran his hand through her sweat-stuck hair. All he could say was, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, my girl." There, in that hot room, time stood still. There was no world outside, only the silent miracle of a girl who cried because she was still alive. When the paramedics arrived, she had already fainted again. Her body was limp, her eyes closed, breathing slowly, but she was still alive. They wrapped her in a thermal blanket, placed her carefully on the stretcher, and took her to the back of the ambulance. Luis went with them to the door without saying anything, his eyes red and his soul broken. He wanted to ask her name. He wanted to know if she was going to survive. He wanted to do something, but didn't know what. The police arrived shortly after, 2 officers in wrinkled uniforms with the look of people who have seen too much and feel too little. They asked quick, direct questions. Full name, parents' names, registration number. And that's when the silence came. No one knew her name. Luis looked at the papers. The label stuck to the coffin. It only said girl. She had no documents, no birth certificate, no contact number. She was a living but invisible girl, with no identity, no official history, only that thin skin, sunken eyes, and the crying that had once again fallen silent. The police called the hospital and tried to find the parents, but there was no phone number or reliable address, only vague information about a small, remote village, a small mud house with no number. Someone would have to go in person to notify them. Meanwhile, the ambulance left with its lights on but no siren, because this was no ordinary rescue. It was something no one there had ever seen before. At the hospital in the capital, in the pediatric emergency room, the doctors were surprised by the case. The doctor on duty read the report and closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to understand something that did not fit in his heart. In the file, they wrote what little they knew. Girl survivor. Attempted cremation. They put her in an intensive care room, hooked her up to machines, gave her IV fluids, and monitored her temperature. A young nurse named Mariana sat down next to her and stared at her for hours without speaking, without making a sound, just looking at that little girl, so small, so fragile, who by some miracle was still alive. And there, amid all the technology, all the machines, all the rules, what hurt the most was the emptiness of a name that no one could say. A living girl with no name, no one, no past, but with a future that now depended on a very thin, almost invisible thread called hope. Dr. Javier Morales arrived at the hospital at the end of that morning with his shirt slightly sweaty under his coat and a folder full of files under his arm. He had been a pediatrician for almost 20 years and had seen it all. Sick children, abandoned children, children hurt inside and out. But that day, when he entered the emergency room and saw the team gathered around an isolated bed, he sensed that something was different in the air. A nurse approached him with a serious face and handed him the case. He read slowly, "Girl survivor of attempted cremation." He read it again silently, unable to believe what he was seeing. He clutched the sheet tighter. His throat went dry, and he asked to see the girl. They took him to one of the rooms in the pediatric ICU. The sound of the machines was soft and constant. In the bed lay a tiny body curled up under white sheets, her face turned to one side, her skin still bearing slight burn marks, especially on her forehead and side of her neck. Her thin hair was stuck to her forehead. Her chest rose slowly with each breath. Javier stood at the door for a few seconds before entering. He felt a weight on his shoulders. Something inside him stirred, an old memory, an emptiness he had learned to hide. He took one step, then another. He sat down on the chair next to the bed. He said nothing, just looked at her. The girl seemed to be asleep, but it was not sleep. It was a mild coma, they said. Her signs were stable, but she did not react. He took her little hand carefully. It was so light, so thin, and still warm. Javier squeezed it gently, and with that touch, everything came back. The memories he had tried to keep hidden for years. His own daughter who had left when she was very young, a misdiagnosed pneumonia, a pain that even time could not heal. The girl there, unconscious, resembled her, the same size, the same fragility. Javier took a deep breath and felt his eyes fill with tears. He didn't let them fall, but he didn't pretend either. He was too human for that. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I don't know who you are, but I'm here." He stayed there longer than he should have. He canceled the following appointments and asked to take charge of the entire case. He told the team, "I'll be keeping an eye on this. This girl needs more than medicine." No one said anything. They all saw in his eyes that there was something more than work. It was his heart. It was a story. It was a man who, upon seeing a girl between life and death, he also saw the opportunity to heal a part of himself. And there, in that quiet room with a nameless girl and a doctor covered in invisible scars, something new began to be born. It wasn't hope yet. It was just care. But sometimes, that's what saves you. The days were long. Javier would come in and out of the room at the same time every day. He had the same calm look, the same soft voice, and a patience that only someone who has known real pain could truly have. He would stand by the bed, holding her hand, telling stories with no beginning and no end, just to fill the silence. Sometimes he would read aloud. Other times he would just stand there, breathing with her, as if his heart could remind hers that it had to keep beating. Time passed slowly, each day bringing a small sign of improvement. Her eyes moved beneath her eyelids, her fingers responded to gentle touches, and then one morning, when no one was expecting anything, she opened her eyes. It was slow at first, just a tiny crack, then a slow blink, as if the light of the world still hurt. Javier was sitting beside her, as always. When he saw her open her eyes, he approached her carefully. "Hello, little one. You're awake." She didn't respond. She looked around, frightened, like someone waking up from a nightmare that hasn't ended. She began to breathe rapidly, her body tensing up. "It's okay. You're safe now," he said, trying to calm her down, gently taking her hand. Then, almost without a voice, her lips parched and her throat dry, she spoke. "Where's Rose?" It was so quiet that Javier thought he had imagined it. He leaned closer. "What did you say, my love?" She turned her head slowly, her eyes filled with tears, and repeated, "Rose. Where's Rose?" That was all, but it was enough. Javier felt a chill run down his spine. It was the first time she had said anything, the first word, and it wasn't about her. It was about someone else, someone called Rose. He didn't know who she was. She could be her sister, her mother, a friend, or perhaps a doll. Children keep names like they keep secrets, but the way she said it wasn't like a toy. It was sad, desperate. That word hung in the air like an unanswered question. Javier crouched down until he was at eye level with her, ran his hand through her tangled hair, and said very slowly, "We're going to find Rose. I promise." She closed her eyes again, as if that were enough for now, and for the first time since they had pulled her from the fire, she slept with a peaceful face. But there, in that hospital room, a new mystery was born, and with it, a search. Because now she was no longer just a nameless girl. She was someone who cried for another person, and that changed everything. Javier couldn't sleep after that early morning when the girl whispered "Rose" in a barely audible voice. He spent hours sitting next to the bed, watching her, trying to piece together the few bits of information she had. The girl had been given up for dead, almost burned alive, with no name, no papers, no one. And now the only clue she gave was a name, Rose. The next day, Javier made a decision he hadn't made in a long time. He asked for 2 days off from the hospital, left the girl with the nurse Mariana, and set off by road. He had noted the name of the village in the file, Santa Cruz del Monte, a small, almost forgotten place lost among hills and dust. He arrived there at the end of the morning. The sun burned the dirt roads. The houses were simple, many made of mud and wood, with crooked roofs and windows covered with rags instead of glass. The air was still, and there was a strange silence, as if time had stopped years ago. Javier went straight to the health center. A young nurse attended to him, somewhat suspiciously. When he asked about a sick girl of few years who had been brought in recently, the nurse just shrugged her shoulders. "We don't have a record. They don't often come here," Javier insisted, and showed him the photo of the girl in the hospital, even though it was blurry. The nurse shook his head and said that perhaps the previous doctor knew something, but he was no longer in the village. He kept walking. He knocked on doors and stopped people on the street, but no one knew anything or wanted to know. In places like this, where poverty and fear go hand in hand, silence is a form of protection. But as he passed a house with a collapsed terrace, an elderly woman sitting on a wooden bench called out to him in a hoarse voice, "Are you looking for a girl, Javier?" He stopped immediately, turned back, and approached her. "Yes, ma'am, a girl who was very sick. No one knows where she came from." She was silent for a moment, staring at the ground, then spoke slowly, as if afraid to remember. "There was a little girl, so small, always sick with fever. We sometimes saw her from afar. She lived down there in a mud house with her parents, and they were quiet, poor, very poor. The father was mean, the mother didn't speak. She just cried." Javier swallowed hard. The woman continued. "One day the girl disappeared. They said she had died, but no one came to ask for help. No one cried. I just saw that the house was emptier. Do you know the girl's name?" The woman shook her head. "No, but you could tell she was an abused child." That was enough. Javier wrote down the location of the house, thanked her with teary eyes, went back to the car, and stayed there for a while, gripping the steering wheel tightly. That girl had been invisible even to her neighbors. She suffered in silence. No one knew her name, but someone knew she was being abused, and no one did anything. The house was at the end of a dirt alley, far from the others. The windows were broken, with pieces of cloth tied where the glass used to be. The front door didn't close properly. It creaked in the wind. Javier stood in front of it for a few seconds in silence. He felt his heart beating differently, as if that place held something he still couldn't explain. He slowly pushed the door and entered. The smell was strong. Dampness, dust, abandonment. The floor was dirt with old footprints and loose pieces of wood. The walls had smudges of dirt and children's drawings that were almost erased, some made with fingers, others with what looked like charcoal. Javier walked carefully through the small living room and a makeshift kitchen with only an old stove and a sink without a faucet. There was no food, no dishes, no sign that anyone lived there now. Everything was empty, empty of people, but full of silence. It was as if that house had learned to remain silent, as if it kept the screams that no one wanted to hear hidden in the cracks and dust. In a corner of what looked like a bedroom, Javier saw a thin mattress on the floor covered with a torn blanket. There was a broken toy, a child's shoe, a plastic bottle with a little dirty water, and in the center of the room, something caught his attention, a crumpled piece of paper half buried in the dry earth. He bent down and picked it up carefully. It was a simple child's drawing made with colored pencils. Two girls holding hands, one with a braid, and the other wearing a blue dress. Above them was a crooked sun and a red heart. At the top of the page, written in large, uneven letters, it said Otzi and Lili. Javier felt a chill. His eyes remained fixed on that word, Lili. Until that moment, no one knew the name of the girl in the hospital. No documents, no clues. But now, for the first time, he may have discovered who she was. He got up slowly, holding the paper as if it were living proof that this house, even if only for a short time, had been home to two girls who drew on the floor the only thing they knew how to do, imagining themselves happy, holding hands under a sun they may never have seen. The silence of that house hurt, and the simple piece of paper now weighed like a scream stuck in time. He left thoughtfully. The next day, when the police finally found the parents, they were in the same mud house that Javier had visited the day before, as if they had been hiding. They were greeted with silence. The father came out first, a man with a tired look, sunburned skin, rough, silent hands. Behind him came the mother, too young to have such sadness on her face, her eyes downcast, her feet bare, her voice stuck in her throat. The first question was simple, but it broke them down. "Do you have a daughter named Lily?" The father slowly scratched his head and looked away. The mother cried silently, and then he said, almost without moving his lips, "She stopped breathing. We called the doctor. The police wrote everything down." Javier listened with a heavy heart. She was quiet for a few days, didn't eat, didn't talk, and then she lay there without moving. Her mother got nervous and shouted, so I went to the health center. The doctor came, examined her, and said she was all ready. His mother, cowering in a corner of the porch, tried to speak, but only cried until, with effort, she said, "They made us sign a paper. We can't read well. We just did what they told us. They didn't see if she was still alive." His father raised his head, his eyes red. "We didn't know. She was cold and still. The doctor said she was dead, so we believed him. She couldn't go on." He sat down on the step and covered his face with his hands. The mother knelt on the floor, still crying, murmuring, "My girl, my girl." There, facing the truth, no one shouted, no one pointed at anyone, because what they saw was not evil. It was ignorance. It was fear. It was the reflection of a forgotten people, where not knowing costs too much. Javier looked at them and felt everything at the same time: anger, compassion, helplessness. The desire to protect the girl, mixed with the pain of seeing two adults crushed by their own misery, by their lack of education, by a life that never gave them options. And then the father said quietly, his eyes on the ground, "We didn't know she was still alive. If I had known, I swear to God, I would have hugged her. I wouldn't have let her go. It was too late, yes, but it was true, and it hurt like a knife." The girl was still in the hospital when her parents arrived, brought in by the police. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. The mother came with red eyes, wearing an old, oversized blouse that covered her hands, as if she wanted to disappear. Her father, with his head bowed, chewed on an unlit cigarette as if that were the only thing keeping him standing. Javier waited for them at the door of the room. He didn't hug them or scold them. He just stood there, watching with a tight chest, his heart torn between the image of that girl inside an oven, alone, burning alive because of a mistake, because of carelessness. On the other side, those two adults in front of him, two ghosts of people, crushed by life, ignorance, poverty, and a pain they didn't even know how to name. The mother was the first to approach. She entered slowly, stepping as if she were entering a sacred place. When she saw her daughter lying with her eyes closed, her little face still marked by burns, she couldn't take it. She fell to her knees next to the bed. She rested her head on the mattress and cried softly, saying random phrases. Forgive me, my love. I didn't know. She stayed there asking for forgiveness, as if she didn't understand what she was saying, like someone drowning in guilt and not knowing how to swim. She wasn't a bad woman. She was a big girl carrying pains that never healed, fears she never knew how to face. She never learned to care, to protect, to love the right way. She loved as best she could, and sometimes that hurts more than abandonment. Her father stayed outside, pressed against the wall. He lit a cigarette with trembling hands. He didn't look toward the room. He didn't try to go in. He just smoked, and blew out the smoke angrily, as if that could erase something inside him. Javier approached him. "She's alive, but just barely." The man nodded without looking up. He didn't say anything. His silence spoke volumes. "You knew she was suffering." The man bit his lip, took a deep breath, and after a long moment replied, "I didn't know what to do. You don't know these things. You just try to survive." Javier listened and felt anger, but also sadness, because it was true, an ugly, harsh truth, but true. They didn't know how to love. They never learned. No one taught them. They were raised with beatings, in silence, with nothing, and they repeated the same thing with their children. as if love were a language they never learned to speak, and the girl almost died because of it. That was the wound that hurt Javier the most, knowing that there are children who grow up like that, not because of their parents' cruelty, but because of their inability to give what they never received. The pain of not knowing how to love can be silent, but it kills. It kills inside, it kills slowly, and sometimes it kills for real. Javier waited for the right moment. He knew he couldn't pressure Lily. She was still weak, her body healing slowly, but her mind seemed to be far away. There were days when she didn't say a word, others when she just stared into space as if looking for someone in the air. It was on a quiet afternoon after the nurse had changed the bandage on the minor burn near her ear that Javier sat down next to her with a random book in his hands, not to read it, but to break the silence. He spoke softly and asked her if she wanted to listen, but Lily didn't answer, so he put the book aside and just looked at her, and that's when she spoke, almost in a whisper, without looking him in the eye. "Rose is my sister." Javier froze. This confirmed everything he had suspected since he found that scratched piece of paper on the floor of the abandoned house. Rose and Lily, the image of the two of them holding hands, was not a child's invention. It was a memory. "Where is Rose, Lily?" The girl closed her eyes tightly and turned her face away. Her lip trembled. She took a long time to answer. "She left a long time ago." Her voice came out softly, with a pain that didn't match her age. Javier felt a lump in his throat. She left, but where? Did she run away? Did she die? No one knew. "Do you remember when that happened?" Lily didn't answer. She remained silent, staring at the ceiling, but the tears fell on their own. When Javier tried to touch her hand, she slowly pulled it away, as if she didn't want anyone to touch that place that hurt inside her. Something inside her was closed, and the name Rose was the key. Lily didn't cry loudly. It was as if she had learned her whole life to cry without making a sound, as if she had learned to hide everything, even what hurt her most. Javier left the room quietly, without insisting, but inside, something was boiling. Now he was sure. Rose existed, and her disappearance was more than a poorly told story. The pain in Lily's eyes wasn't just sadness. It was fear and guilt. It was the memory of something no one wanted to see, and Javier knew it. He had to discover the truth, because as long as Lily didn't know that her sister was okay, wherever she was, that wound inside her, but would not heal. Javier returned to the capital with the name Rose spinning around in his head. Something inside him told him that this was bigger than it seemed. That girl, Lily, wasn't the only one who had suffered in that house. There were others, and he needed to understand. He went to the social services office, an old building in the city center where the oldest case files were kept. He spent hours searching through folders, handwritten notes, papers yellowed by time and neglect. Then he found it. A complaint filed 3 years ago by a neighbor, Doña Esperanza, from the same town. She described screams, beatings, very skinny children left alone for hours. The report said that the older sister, Rose, always protected the little one, hiding her under the bed when their father yelled. The file had the social services stamp. The case was open, but only one girl was taken away. Rose, the older sister, the one who stood in front of her sister, was taken to a shelter, but after that, nothing. No updates, no visits. No one checked on what had happened to the little one. Lily stayed behind, and no one came back for her. Javier closed his eyes and clenched the paper between his fingers. He felt a dry rage mixed with sadness. How could a child be forgotten like that? How could someone see 2 beaten bodies and save only one? Back at the hospital, something wouldn't leave him alone. It was the clothes, the only ones Lily had been wearing when she was almost burned alive. The nurse had put them in a plastic bag and set them aside. Javier grabbed those dirty clothes, still smelling of smoke, and examined them carefully. It was in the pocket of the dress, sewn inside, where he found a small piece of paper folded many times, almost the size of a stamp. He opened it calmly. It was a sheet from a notebook, with a girl's shaky handwriting at the top, a phrase written forcefully, as if by someone who knew they didn't have much time left. "If I die, tell them I want to live with someone who looks at me with love." Javier stood still with the paper between his fingers, his chest tight and breathless. That phrase was like a cry from the bottom of a well. It was a call for help that she left in case she didn't wake up, a last wish written with the innocence of someone who just wanted to be seen, felt, loved. He sat right there on the floor of the hospital hallway and cried. He cried silently, without haste, as if each tear washed away the injustice of years, because no one should be so small as to write their own will, asking only for a loving glance. Javier didn't stop after the little note. The pain in the girl's words was a wound he could no longer ignore. With the name Rose in his hand, and the old report as evidence, he sought help from social workers in the capital. He checked files, went to shelters, compared names and dates. It wasn't easy. There were many Roses, many incomplete papers, many girls left by the world without a destination. But one name matched: Rose Gutierrez, 14 years old, living in a shelter on the outskirts of the city. An old file noted that she had been removed from her home at age 10 due to abuse. On the file, a small, almost erased note said she had a younger sister who could not be located. Javier went that same day. The shelter was simple but clean. Rose was in the courtyard, sitting under a tree with her hair tied in a makeshift bun and her gaze lost in the sky when the director of the place called her and told her that someone wanted to talk to her. She got up slowly, distrustful, like someone who has learned not to expect much from life. Javier introduced himself and spoke calmly, saying that he was a doctor who was caring for a girl named Lily, that she had awakened from a coma and had said his name. Rose froze. Her eyes grew wide and filled with tears, and for a second, she didn't breathe. Then, her voice trembling, she asked, "She's alive." Javier felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Where is she? Where is my sister?" She was already crying when he answered. They took a car and went straight to the hospital. On the way, Rose told him everything. She said she had run away at the age of 9 because she couldn't take the screaming, the beatings, the hunger anymore. She had tried to protect Lily, but she was too young. She thought her sister had died long ago. When they entered the hospital, Rose could hardly walk. Her legs were shaking. Her heart was beating so hard that she had to stop for a second before entering the room. Javier took her hand, squeezed it affectionately, and said, "She's waiting for you." Rose entered slowly. Lily was lying down, staring at the ceiling, playing with her fingers. When she heard the door, she turned her face and remained still. Their eyes met for a second. No one said anything. Time stood still, and then Rose ran and threw herself on her sister with a cry that hurt inside. She hugged her tightly, as if she wanted to stick together the pieces that time had separated. And between sobs, she said, repeating over and over, "I thought you were dead. I thought I would never see you again. Forgive me." Lily also cried. She put her thin little arms around her sister and rested her face on her neck. Neither of them needed to explain anything else there in that hospital room. There was no pain, no past, no abandonment. There was reunion, and there was love. The impossible reunion happened and changed everything. After the two sisters were reunited, Javier could no longer go to the hospital as he had before. Before, he had entered as a doctor. Now he entered as someone who was in over his head. He slept little, ate poorly, and spent more time than he should have at Lily and Rose's bedside. Since they had found each other again, the girls were inseparable. It was as if time had stopped in that embrace, and they didn't want to let go. But soon came the next step, the inevitable, the decision of justice. Although the parents had been located, they were not in a position to care for anyone. The history of abuse, neglect, extreme poverty, and total lack of emotional or material support made it impossible for them to return to that home. The girls could not and should not go back there. That was clear. The social worker explained it to Javier in a practical, direct voice, as if she had said it 1,000 times before. They would go to a shelter together if possible, but it was not certain. It was difficult to find someone who would accept Dos Hermanas. Javier's heart sank. The idea of them being separated again hurt him more than he thought it would. Lily was just beginning to smile. Rose was still asleep, holding her sister's hand. How could he accept them being torn away once again? And where to? To another institution, another cold place with rules but no love? He remained silent, staring at the table. The social worker continued talking about procedures, times, papers. He was no longer listening. He only saw the girls playing with colored pencils in the corner of the room, Lily drawing with her tongue between her teeth, Rose making little braids in her sister's hair. Suddenly, without thinking much about it, he spoke. "What if I stay with them?" The woman stopped and looked at him in surprise. "You? Yes. I live alone. I have everything. I know the case. They trust me." She sighed. "It's not that easy, doctor. You're single. You live alone. The process requires a family, stable ties." "I know," he interrupted her in a firm voice. "But what they need most right now is not a piece of paper. It's someone to stay with them, to look them in the eyes and say, 'I'm here. I can do that.'" The social worker didn't respond immediately. She wrote something in her notebook, changed her tone, and promised to pass on the idea. But Javier already knew the road would be long, difficult, and full of obstacles. When he returned to the room, Lily was sleeping in Rose's lap. He stood at the door for a moment, then approached, slowly adjusted the blanket, and arranged the pillow. Rose opened her eyes, half asleep, and asked softly, "Are they going to separate us?" Javier held back the tears and smiled weakly, replying, "I'll do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen." Those words were not a promise. They were a wish, a prayer from someone who, for the first time, was thinking of adopting something that did not fit into a diagnosis. Two girls who were wounded, but hungry for love. Javier was sitting in front of the judge when he heard the words he feared most. Her voice was firm, but cold, as if it had nothing to do with her. "The request for temporary custody has been denied for the moment." He thought he had heard wrong. He remained still, waiting for her to say something else, but she said nothing. The judge adjusted her glasses, gathered her papers, and explained, "You are single. You have no history of adoption. You live alone. You do not meet the traditional family profile required for this type of urgent custody." Javier could not react. The words hit him like hammer blows. Everything he had experienced with those girls in the last few days, all the love, all the care, none of it counted. He left the room without knowing where to go. His body walked, but his mind was empty. He could only think of the two girls sleeping together in each other's arms, and Rose's question from the night before, "Are they going to separate us?" Back at the hospital, he sat on the edge of Lily's bed, unable to hide the exhaustion on his face. She noticed immediately and looked at him as someone who senses danger before being told about it. "What happened, Javier?" He swallowed hard and tried to smile, but he couldn't. He stroked her hair tenderly. "The courts wouldn't let me. They say I can't take care of you." Lily was silent for a moment, then squeezed his hand tightly and asked in a low, hard voice, like a blow, "So you're going to leave me again?" It was like a stab in the heart. There was no good answer. No explanation would do. Javier wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. He stood there still, his eyes filled with tears and his heart broken, but he knew he couldn't let it end like this. The next day, he got up early, grabbed his car, and went straight to a local television station. He asked to speak to the news department and told them everything, the whole story, from the medical error to the oven, to the word whispered to Rose. He showed them photos, the drawing found in the house, the piece of paper in the dress pocket, the letter written by the girl who just wanted to live with someone who would look at her with love. The reporter couldn't hold back her tears. The technical team fell silent. In less than 24 hours, the story was on television, and the reaction was immediate. Thousands of people shared it, commented on it, got angry. It was impossible to hear that story and not feel something, not put yourself in her place, not think, "What if it were my daughter?" The justice system, under pressure, understood that it was no longer just a formality. It was a cry, a voice from many people asking that, at least for once, love would weigh more than paperwork. And so they reopened the case. A new opportunity, perhaps the last one. But this time, Javier was no longer alone. He had the support of an entire country and two girls waiting for a different ending. The decision came on a gray afternoon without any important announcement. A simple envelope with the seal of the juvenile. Juvenile court was delivered into Javier's hands. He opened it with trembling hands, his heart racing as if his own future was inside. And when he read the words, "temporary custody granted," he didn't cry. He just smiled a short, quiet smile, but one that was full, like someone who after a long time can finally breathe deeply. That same day, he returned to the hospital with the paper in his hand. Rose saw him arrive and ran to hug him around the waist. Lily, weaker, waited for him in bed, with her eyes shining as if she already knew. Javier knelt in front of the two of them and said with a trembling voice, "Let's go home." And so it was. His home, which had once been so quiet, became something else. It was small, with 2 rooms, a small living room, and a kitchen where barely 3 people could fit at the same time. But now there was life in every corner, soft laughter during the day, the sound of pencils scratching paper, the TV on low volume with cartoons that he hadn't watched since he lost his daughter. In the kitchen, the smell of cake began to be part of the afternoons. Rose helped break the eggs, Lily more carefully stirred the batter, and the laughter of the two filled the house as if it were music. At night, after their bath, came the books. Javier would sit between the beds, open a children's book, and read calmly, pausing to use funny voices. The girls listened with their eyes wide open. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they fell asleep halfway through the story. The room that had once been empty now had color, 2 simple beds, flowered blankets, a drawing taped to the wall. The Morales family. Rose drew it, Lily painted it, and Javier just looked at it with hidden tears, lying in the room next door. He listened to their breathing, one softer, the other deeper, and for the first time in many years, he didn't feel like he was missing anything, not the daughter he lost, nor the life he thought he would never have again. In that meaningful silence, Javier slept peacefully, because now, finally, there was a home, a small home made of silence and love, and that was everything all they needed, all he didn't know he needed either. It was one of those clear mornings when the sun shined softly through the cracks in the window. Rose was already in the kitchen helping Javier with breakfast, but Lily was taking a long time to come out of the room. Javier, cup in hand, asked, "Is everything okay in there?" She replied in a calm voice, "Yes, I'm just looking in the room." Lily was standing in front of the small mirror hanging on the wall, the only one Javier had been able to get for them. Her hair, still a little messy from sleep, fell over her shoulders, and there, near her right ear, was a soft mark, almost invisible from a distance, but noticeable. It was the scar, the memory of something no one should ever have to experience. A thin line curved by heat, desperation, error, a sign of a day when almost everything ended. She stared at it for a while, not with sadness or anger, but with a different kind of gaze. She touched the mark with her finger slowly, as if to see if it still hurt, and it no longer hurt. The skin was firm, alive, and so was her chest. She smiled a quiet, small smile, but one full of meaning, and then she said to herself, as if the phrase had been stored away for a long time, "It was the fire that woke me up." She did not say it with pain. There was no weight in that phrase, only the truth. That pain, that heat, that scream that no one heard was what made her come back. It was what made someone hear her. It was what saved her. And now, with that mark on her face, she no longer felt shame, she felt pride. There was the proof of everything she had lived through, and everything she had endured here. Because the mark was not an end. It was the beginning. It was the exact point where life began again. And every time she looked in the mirror, she would not see the pain. She would see the strength, the courage to have returned, the courage to continue. Lily left the room with her hair tied to the side, not hiding the scar. Javier saw her, but said nothing, just smiled at her with wet eyes, because he knew that smile on her face said more than any words could. It was the smile of someone who already knew she was strong, that she was loved, and that she was alive. It was an ordinary afternoon. Javier was washing the dishes while the girls did their homework at the dining room table. The sound of pencils on paper was soft, almost like a whisper. The smell of bread baking filled the house, and everything seemed peaceful until the doorbell rang. Javier dried his hands, opened the gate, and froze. It was her, The girl's mother. She was thinner. Her face looked tired, her eyes sunken. She was clutching an old bag tightly to her chest, as if she had been carrying a heavy weight for a long time. "I just want to see my daughters," she said in a low voice. Javier hesitated, then called Rose and Lily. Rose froze when she heard her. Her face changed. She shook her head and ran to her room. She didn't want to, but Lily stood still, looked at the open door, looked at Javier, and slowly walked toward the gate. The mother approached, knelt down, her eyes filled with tears. "My girl, I didn't know. I didn't know how to take care of Lily." Lily listened without running away. She stood there, small but firm. "I forgive you," she said in a calm voice, "but I don't want to go back." The woman cried and lowered her head. Javier approached, put his hand on the girl's shoulder, then looked into the woman's eyes and spoke very carefully but truthfully. "You can come see them whenever you want, but you have to understand that if you truly love these girls, you have to leave them where they will have a future, where they will study, eat, and grow up with dignity. Otherwise, they will repeat what you experienced and grow up thinking that love hurts. And that's not true." The woman nodded slowly and said nothing more. She just wiped her face with the sleeve of her blouse, looked at Lily one more time, and left. Days later, the courtroom was full. Javier was nervous, wearing an old suit and looking hopeful. He waited with the papers in his hand. The girls were sitting by his side, holding hands. The judge read the case, read it again, looked at Javier, and then, in a serious but firm voice, said, "Adoption approved as of today." Javier couldn't hold back his tears. He signed with trembling hands. Lily hugged him tightly without saying anything, but her eyes said it all. Rose stood nearby, wiping her face with her hand. She looked at the judge and said quietly, "I want to be a Morales too." And at that moment, it was just an adoption. It was the birth of a family, one of those families that are not formed by blood, but by determination, courage, and love. It was late when Javier took the girls out for a walk. The neighborhood square was quiet, full of trees, with the smell of popcorn in the air. The sky was painted orange, with the sun slowly hiding behind the buildings, giving a sense of peace that seemed made just for them as they walked hand in hand. The three of them, Javier in the middle with Lily on one side and Rose on the other. They were laughing at something silly, a joke that only they understood. They passed by a man selling cotton candy, then sat down on a wooden bench where Rose drew in her notebook, and Lily proudly announced that she already knew how to add in her head. Then behind them, on a peeling wall, a poster caught their attention. It had large letters that looked like scribbles, but were very strong. "Don't let ignorance extinguish lives." Javier read it silently and felt a chill. He knew those words were not just a message, they were a memory, a mirror of what almost happened. Because if the oven had been on for 5 more minutes, if no one had heard that impossible sound, if Lily hadn't knocked on the door with her last ounce of strength, she wouldn't be there. She wouldn't be smiling or running or saying "Dad" before going to sleep. She would have been just another statistic, another mistake lost on a piece of paper, another girl that no one saw. But she survived. And not only her, Rose also came back to life. Javier, too. They, who came from the pain of abandonment, of fear, now formed a family that was born from the impossible, born from a mistake. But it was the mistake that awakened love in Javier's lap. Lily rested her head and asked, "Are we going to be together forever?" He looked up at the sky, squeezed her little hand, and replied softly, "Always, my girl, always." Thanks for watching so far. Now answer this. If you were in Javier's shoes, what would you do? Leave a comment below and subscribe for more stories like this. See you tomorrow in a new story.